Hi guys, Assalamualaikum. My name is Ula and I'm doing a report on bioethanol, the environmental impact and techno-economic analysis of bioethanol.
Your car, the heating system in your house, your gas stove. Most of the energy you use comes from fossil fuels, which present a couple of problems. First, there are limited supplies of fossil fuels, so the more we use, the less we've got. And second, the use of fossil fuels is the main cause of climate change because it releases large amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Biofuels come from natural, renewable sources like plants, so they have the potential to reduce our reliance on those limited supply fossil fuels and reduce the risk of climate change.
What is ethanol? Ethanol, which forms the basis of E85, is a renewable resource which can be produced from sorghum, as well as byproducts linked to the agricultural production of wheat and sugar. It also forms the basis of a fuel with a very exciting future. Ethanol production technology is so clever, within a few years, we anticipate being able to create it from everyday materials like regular household waste. So in the future, rubbish ranging from food scraps to dirty nappies could be used to help fuel your car.
Most biofuels today are made from corn grain that is fermented into ethanol. But we have a limited supply of this corn, so it's not a solution to the limited supply part of the quandary. It also takes a lot of resources to grow corn grain. Strike two. A potential solution, using cellulose instead of corn grain to make ethanol. Cellulose is far more abundant than corn grain and takes less energy to produce. In fact, it's the most abundant organic molecule on the planet. Cellulose is the main ingredient found in a plant's cell wall. Plants generate cellulose from water and carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. So whereas using fossil fuels produce carbon dioxide, using cellulose-based ethanol might help remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The main obstacle is that the cellulose molecule, a long connected chain of glucose sugar protected by a tough molecular sheath, is difficult to break apart. Creating cellulose-based ethanol means first unwrapping that protective sheath and then chopping up the cellulose into its individual glucose molecule. Only once we have unpacked each glucose molecule can we begin fermentation. But some microorganisms, like bacteria or fungi, break down cellulose for energy all the time. For example, dairy cows eat foods like hay or alfalfa, which are full of cellulose. Microbes that live in their stomachs produce an enzyme called cellulase, which breaks apart the cellulose molecules so that the cow can use what's left for energy. Researchers are now studying these kinds of microorganisms in the hopes of finding better ways to break down cellulose so we can use it for our own energy needs. The solution, they think, lies in finding microbes in nature that can produce the kinds of cellulase enzymes that we need. This process of searching for species in nature that can produce valuable products is called bioprospecting. To test whether or not a sample of microbes can break down cellulose effectively, researchers first grow the microbe in a test tube. Then, they add a source of cellulose as the sole form of energy. If the microbe can't produce cellulase and break down cellulose, the test tube will remain unchanged. But if the microbe produces the enzymes we are looking for, it will be able to break down cellulose, use it for energy, and thrive in its test tube environment. If our microbial sample can break down the cellulose in the test tube, there is a chance we can use it to create a renewable and sustainable source of fuel for our cars from cellulose.
Biofuels are currently the only viable replacement to petroleum transportation fuels because they can be used in existing combustion engines. This is an increasingly important advantage with growing concern about the environmental impacts of fossil fuels around the globe. Biofuels can also help provide energy security in regions that do not have hydrocarbon resources but do have suitable agricultural conditions. While there is some dispute over just how renewable biofuels are, it is generally accepted that the crops used to produce them can be replenished much faster than fossil fuels, which take millions of years to form. concerns about biofuels are usually centered around the fact that they are an agricultural product. Producing these biofuel crops can mean competition with other natural resources, particularly land, food, and water. First-generation biofuels use only edible crops, which has led to biofuel crops displacing food sources in certain regions and subsequent spikes in food prices. In many regions of the world, subsidies are provided for these crops, which only amplifies these issues.
Corn, ethanol, food, fuel. Food versus fuel. It's the classic debate. For some, corn ethanol is a repulsive idea. Corn is food. Food is life. You don't burn it. With all the corn used for ethanol, we need more corn and other crops to maintain the food supply. Where do you grow those crops with all that land dedicated to ethanol? Worldwide, you can find people somewhere without enough to eat. Remember the 2007 Mexican tortilla riots? Tortilla prices tripled because of an international corn shortage. Can we blame ethanol for some of that? Yes, we can. It's simple supply and demand. But let's look at it the way the folks who make ethanol do. A $3 box of cornflakes only contains a few cents worth of corn. If a bushel of corn goes up by, say, 30%, maybe because ethanol helped drive up the price, the cornflakes will only cost a penny or two more. Most costs are from processing, shipping, and advertising.
I'd rather have corn, Kellogg's corn, flakes on the mountain.
The big problem comes in years when there's a drought, and that, farmers will say, is out of their hands. One last thing. The corn used for ethanol feeds the livestock we eat and sweetens the beverages we drink. But it also goes into plastics, deodorant, hand sanitizer, carpeting, makeup, glue, paint, shoe polish. So then is it food versus fuel? Or is it food versus everything?
In order to gain land to grow crops suitable for biofuel production, massive deforestation has to take place. To understand the issue, think about what key process trees do and why it isn't beneficial to the environment to have mass deforestation for land space. Pause the video, think about these questions and continue when you're ready. The answer is that trees remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by photosynthesis and produce oxygen. Removing trees to make space for biofuel crops contributes directly to global warming by allowing greenhouse gas emissions to increase. In addition, the soil used to grow crops will become depleted of nutrients over time, as growing crops on deforested land accelerates this process. There are 4 main bioethanol crops: corn, sugarcane, sweet sorghum, and pine, which are hugely farmed. Increasing their production to meet energy demands means that fresh water supplies could also be depleted, reducing the amount of fresh water available.
Why bioethanol? Bioethanol can reduce CO2 emissions by 40% when compared to driving on petrol. This includes CO2 emissions across the entire process, from growing the crops to extracting the waste, refining and transporting the fuel and powering your vehicle. It's what we call well-to-wheel. Here's how it works. Australian ethanol producers currently use the byproducts from food production found on top of the ground instead of beneath it. These materials absorb CO2 as they grow, converting energy from the sun in a sustainable process. As the source of the ethanol comes from waste, we don't have to put as much stress on the environment to produce the fuel.
Exhaust gases of ethanol are much cleaner compared to conventional gasoline as it undergoes more complete combustion. The use of ethanol blended fuels such as E85, 80% ethanol and 50% gasoline can reduce the net emission of greenhouse gases by as much as 37.1%, which is a significant amount. of ethanol blended fuel as E10, which is 10% ethanol and 90% gasoline, is able to reduce greenhouse gases by up to 3.9%.
Now we will shift to the second part of the video, in which involve the techno-economic analysis of bioethanol. Basically, it involves the technology required in order to reduce the amount of capital investment cost required to produce bioethanol.